Tonight we are going to explore the subject of mind control in America and how it is being used to exert more and more influence over us all. We are also going to talk about, in hour number 2, America's incredible corrupt money system as it has been created and dictated by the so-called Federal Reserve. Our paper money supply is, according to our guest, the biggest financial shakedown in history. His name is Stephen Jacobson, filmmaker, author, and graduate of the Boston University School of Communication. Mr. Jacobson spent 13 years in the film industry before beginning a full-time study of the use of hypnotic and subliminal techniques in American mass media, especially in film, TV, and popular music. Stephen Jacobson has produced 2 remarkable audio cassettes to date, Mind Control in America, and just recently, Wake Up America, which reveals how money is created and how the tax system really works. Stephen Jacobson joins us now live from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you, Jeff. It's my pleasure to be speaking with you this evening.
Well, thank you again. And your first audio cassette, called Mind Control in America, begins with the statement, "Psychological warfare has been waged against America for much of this century. This war for the mind of the public has been facilitated by the emergence of the mass media and the transformation of American education by behavioral psychologists." Stephen, why can't people think for themselves anymore?
That is a problem. We, as a nation, must awaken to an understanding of the difference between what is real and what is illusion. All of the problems in America are the result of people having been led to believe things that are not true. And I would go even further to say that it also applies to the rest of the world. People believe things that are not true, and that is at the very core of all of our problems.
Wasn't George Orwell the first man to really call this thing way back when and predict mind control?
Well, not the first person, but certainly in this century, very perceptive in what he foresaw, because much of what he wrote about back then has already come to pass. As an interesting anecdote, I read a while back, cannot cite the source offhand, but George Orwell, according to one source that I came across, was a member of British intelligence. And if that is so, then it puts an entirely new twist on his perception, in that he would have been privy to information that would make his predictions informed predictions.
Yes, indeed. Is there any way that the average citizen can protect him or herself against these techniques of mind control, which we will discuss at length as the program unfolds?
Protection is knowledge and information. We are controlled primarily by 2 means. First, to control what people think, you control the flow of information, sources of information, and then you influence how that information is processed. A continuing trend through the years has been the consolidation of ownership of all media, press, publishing, newspapers, film, television, music. The number of companies over the years, and it continually becomes less and less, number of companies controlling the flow of information, not only in this country, but globally. That's a problem. When you don't have access to all the information, then how are we to make proper decisions if we don't have the benefit of all points of view? We can't. Our judgment is only as good as our information. And so, information, the flow of information is controlled by established media outlets. 2, processing of information is influenced. The best example is the example of television, the one-eyed cyclops that people have in their living room and bedroom and kitchen and den and other rooms. People have become so familiar with having that contraption in their environment that they do not see it as a potential weapon to be used against them. And yes, I did say weapon. It is perhaps the most powerful weapon developed in this century. Regardless of the content of television, the very nature of the medium induces a hypnotic state of mind. The principles of mental programming, hypnotic suggestion, mind control, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't matter what term you use, the principle involved in it remains the same. The objective is to suspend the thought processes in order to create a state of mind that is very similar to daydreaming.
Let me ask you a question before we get too far away. You mentioned something fascinating just a moment ago about the consolidation of ownership of all the major American media outlets. Do you have any statistics on the number of corporations that really control things?
It's Ben Begdikian, who is a former former national editor at the Washington Post and dean of the Graduate School of Journalism at the University of California at Berkeley, reported in his book, The Media Monopoly, first published in 1983, that at that time, 50 corporations controlled most of America's media.
Yes.
The second edition, published in 88, the number shrank to 29. 1990, it shrank to 26. Then it's the latest figures I don't have, but again the trend is towards fewer and fewer companies controlling the media. Robert Maxwell, media mogul before his death, had made the comment that there would be, in the not very distant future, about 10 corporations that would control the global flow of information, and he intended to be one of those 10.
Wow. What the mind believes, the subconscious acts upon. That's an axiom in this whole control game, isn't it?
Well, it's it's like programming a computer. We are fed information, and we act on that information, but if the information is wrong and we do not perceive its error, we're going to still act on it. And if a person believes something that's not true, well, the memory banks of the subconscious are not going to correct the error, but act on it. It's a problem. People have a tendency, understandably, to believe things that are consistent with what they already believe. And so it takes a conscious effort to examine what we believe in order to grow, for one. It's a matter of not having been given proper information, having been given misinformation. The people that run the world, who pull the strings, are where they are because they know some things that the rest of the people do not know. Secret knowledge has always been the basis of power, and it is how ruling elites arise. There does exist a ruling class in this nation, as there exists a ruling class in other nations. It filters down even into local areas where you have old families, old money, and new money controlling a particular geographical area or what happens in a particular area. Government has always been historically a servant of private wealth, but again, controlling the flow of information, and then how we process that information is to influence us to think in a particular way, to distract us from the things that are really important, to keep us from understanding what's going on out here.
Okay, we're going to take our first break, Stephen, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the actual use of propaganda, the techniques. You mentioned distraction, what that does vis-a-vis stopping conscious thought process, and hypnosis, which is a very important part of that. As we continue here at the end of the line, News Talk 1250 KTMS. All right, we are back. My guest tonight, Stephen Jacobson, live on the phone from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, an expert in mind control. Stephen, propaganda, mind control, whatever you want to call it, has to do certain things to the mind in order to be effective. Can you give me a synopsis of that?
Well, it needs to short-circuit all conscious thinking and operate on the individual subconsciously. Now, the way that it does this, and again, using television as an example of some of these techniques, first of all, again, television, by its very nature, induces a hypnotic state of mind.
Explain that, will you?
The very nature of the medium, although the picture appears to be static, it is actually flickering. We don't see it consciously because of how our vision works and with the brain, but subconsciously, that flickering automatically induces an altered state.
Mm-hmm.
Now, regardless of what the person is watching on television, any advertiser, any propagandist wants his viewers' undivided attention. And again, the goal is to clear all thought, all mental activity, so that the message can be implanted without any interference.
It's pretty frightening to go into a room and not be a television watcher and watch people staring at that. It's such an empty, vulnerable look if you watch them closely.
Well, sure. If you've seen young people, children in front of a TV set, or even older adults in front, or even observing your own behavior in front of a television set, going into that zombie-like stare, is a natural reaction to the technology itself. Now, there are different techniques that are used to deepen that state of mind, because it is in that state of mind where we are the most suggestible. And that's why the importance of wanting to create the circumstances where people's minds will be blank, so that the message can be given and repeated, and over a period of time you'll have a conditioned response to a particular thing.
You mentioned the television image, the picture itself, whether it's moving or static, is still flickering.
It's still flickering, yeah. So it doesn't matter what the kind of programming the person is watching. The very nature of the medium puts someone in that state of mind. Now, that flickering is a visual pattern that you are not perceiving consciously. A principle is involved there, and the principle is this: any repeating sound pattern, any repeating light pattern will induce that state of mind and deepen that state of mind. An example: flashing words or numbers in TV commercials or infomercials. Any movement is meant to catch the attention of your eye. When your eye locks, the purpose of it is to get you to lock onto it visually in order to induce the state of mind or deepen that state of mind. Repeating sound patterns, jingles, are meant to do that as well. Any repeating pattern. A hypnotist uses pattern speech to induce this state of mind in his subject. He will vary the pacing and tone of his voice. An example, on TV, newscasters, regardless of their background, ethnic background, whether they be black, white, Hispanic, Oriental, doesn't matter, they all talk the same way. They have a particular speech pattern. The way a newscaster speaks is associated with the dissemination of true factual information. It is a pattern that people have been conditioned to accept as such. And it is the pattern is similar to that of a hypnotist. The eye contact that a newscaster makes with the individual in their own living room is also a technique of a hypnotist. television is the technology of television in this century. It's the only time where an entire people, a nation, can be spoken to on an individual basis in their homes.
That's just
on
amazing.
On a one-to-one basis.
Yeah, now you mentioned television newscasters. They do seem to come from the same mold. Eye contact is important, but maybe even more important than that in some cases is the way that an intonation, an inflection, a nuance in a phrase can actually distort and change almost the entire meaning of a news story, can't it?
Sure.
Tremendous power.
Very powerful. The camera can pick up the slightest movement, a subtle change of an expression, and give it significance and definition without anything having to be spoken.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned repetition over and over again, and certainly children's programming these days. If you, and we've spoken about this on this program before. You watch the kids' programs, and many of the commercials 30 seconds long. Just get a paper and pencil and count the number of scenes that are crammed into a 30-second television commercial. It's just incredible. Sometimes over 50 scenes in a 30-second commercial going into the mind of a 5, 6, 7, or an 8-year-old. And many of these scenes, as you well know, are pans and zooms.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's almost an amphetamine-like dose of pace, isn't it?
Oh, sure. The change that you can observe in the programming from years back to what we have now, not only content but technique, that fast-paced cutting, assaulting you with information, more information than we can process. The information, all of it, is second-hand information. Many people, especially young people, and numerous studies have shown this, where it's really beyond question that young people and older people will take cues and messages from what they see on television. People learn how to deal with different life situations from television, and that's not a healthy place to get it from, because all the content, regardless of even the most innocuous programming. I was losing the point that I was getting to, but again, a different. The point I wanted to make is first you clear the mind, and then the repetition of the message. It is the same process of learning, of studying in school, that you focus on the material that you're studying, clearing your mind of all extraneous thinking.
Right, 2 times 2 is...
the repetition of the message.
Multiplication tables over and over again, the same thing.
Right.
Yeah. All right, what about subliminal perception now? You've got repetition here as an issue. What about your basic feeling about the source of the information? How important is that? Do you have
it's vital, because if we're not... we are no better, again, than our judgment's no better than our information. And if all of our sources of information are controlled, then our thinking is going to be faulty on everything. When I first got involved in investigating the issue, it was back in 1980, while I was still working in film up in New York City. I was given the results of private research investigating hypnosis, and that, as a result of going through that material, I left New York, I left the career I've been pursuing, and to investigate this whole issue, and not only investigate the techniques involved, but place it to some kind of historical perspective. At the same time, I received the research materials. In that same time frame, I was exposed to 2 books dealing with the conspiracy theory of history. And after going through that, it made sense, and I wanted to investigate it further, since we all have a responsibility to seek truth and understanding, and began first with what was in the bibliography to track down information, and over the years have acquired a library of literally hundreds of books and documents, videos, audios from all over the country and other countries dealing with information that is not available from the established media sources, and that you're not going to find in most libraries, simply to see what else is available. There is a huge alternative press out there, and unless one becomes exposed to it somehow, a person is not going to be aware that there is much information out there that can help us to understand what's going on out here and help right the many wrongs that are being perpetuated.
In the film business, the movie that you mentioned in your one audio presentation, The Exorcist, a lot of techniques were used. Can you detail those for us?
Well, it goes under the heading of subliminal perception, use of subliminal techniques. Let me define what it is. Subliminal perception is the process where we receive and respond to both visual and sound information without being aware of it. The message can be in the form of printed words, pictures, flashed on the screen so quickly that it's not consciously perceived, or a spoken message hidden in the soundtrack so that it is not consciously perceived. Research done back in the 50s, one item in particular, a marketing researcher tested flashing messages on a movie screen in New Jersey. One of the messages was, hungry, eat popcorn, and the other, drink Coca-Cola. Well, sales for both increased, and it led to a massive effort to research subliminal perception by not only every major advertising agency in North America, but elsewhere, and by nations investigating it, and intelligence agencies investigating this whole issue of how to influence people's thinking and thereby control their behavior. But subliminal perception is responding to a message that you can't consciously see. The movie The Exorcist used both subliminal pictures and sounds. Interesting side note to The Exorcist, and people did faint in response to the movie. There were many news reports of people becoming nauseous and people having nightmares. William Peter Blatty, the author of the novel and producer of the movie, interestingly enough, was a CIA operative who served as the policy branch chief of the Psychological Warfare Division of the United States Air Force.
Aha.
So I would not doubt that there have been many experiments carried out over the years to see how people would respond to different stimuli through the media. I'm sure that many people are aware of the radio broadcast in 1938, H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds, performed by Orson Welles's Mercury Theater on the radio, led people in that area, geographical area, many people to believe that the nation was being invaded by Martians. People did believe it. In 1983, the TV movie Special Bulletin about terrorists exploding an atomic bomb in Charleston, South Carolina, prompted many people to call stations across the country to ask if it was real. And even though there were disclaimers during the program to tell people that it was not authentic, still many people did believe what they were seeing because it was being presented in the format of a newscast.
That's right. Now, the subliminal perception question in The Exorcist and probably many other films since then is one that raises the issue about control. Is there any regulation of these techniques in the mass media in this country?
Well, supposedly there is a law or regulation, FCC regulation, regarding subliminal advertising. But then the thing with subliminal techniques is that you are not going to consciously perceive it. You will see only by accident will you learn of any specific techniques or examples. A number of years ago, there was an example reported in TV Guide and elsewhere of a parent accidentally recording a cartoon that his child was watching, and there was a flash frame in there that that caught his eye. He rewound the tape to that place, and there was a message to that flash frame. It was traced back to a Japanese firm that had produced the program, and it had been done as a hoax. The implant of that one of that frame.
How widespread do you think this is today in film?
It's really hard to tell. The techniques are manipulative enough without having to resort to the flashing of messages.
Yes.
We are affected subliminally by the content itself, regardless of the entertainment value or lack of it of any programming. It all has ideological content and messages for people to pick up on how to deal with life situations. The connection between crime and violence out in the street and crime and violence and its depiction in the media, the connection is there. Enough studies have been done to show a direct connection. But even if they had not been done, the armed forces has done experimentation with film. There's a specific example cited in the mind control tape of Dr. at NATO using film to show to servicemen who were not inclined to kill so that it would be easier for them to do so. And they were shown films of people being killed and maimed to desensitize them to those acts. Mm-hmm. Well, that one example itself shows a direct link between the graphic depiction of violence in media and what is happening out here in the streets.
Okay, Stephen, we're going to take our second break here, and when we come back, let's talk about popular music, rock music, MTV, and what that music can actually physiologically do to people, in addition to the psychological ramifications of listening to it. As we continue at the end of the line, News Talk 1250 KTMS. We are back, and we're talking about mind control techniques in American mass media. Stephen, popular music, rock music, is a very rich topic to get into at this point, I guess, given what we've talked about. How does music affect us physiologically?
It affects us not only physically, but affects people's emotions, affects their minds. But physically, sound, it causes changes not only in our body chemistry, it affects changes in blood pressure, breathing, and digestion. Fast music will speed up the nervous system. Slow music will slow it down. Our entire body is sensitive to sound. Literally, our body can be played and is played using sound. Low tones vibrate in the lower parts of the body. High tones vibrate in the higher portions and on into the head. Even sounds that we cannot hear affect us and can cause headaches, nausea, dizziness, fatigue. With regard to much of today's popular rock music, most of it is built around a heavy bass pattern louder than the melody. Now, this is no accident. These loud, low-frequency vibrations and the driving beat of most rock music affect the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland produces hormones that control both male and female sexual responses, so that the low-tone, heavy vibration vibrates in the lower part of the body so that the music feels good. Now, again...
It really does feel good, doesn't it?
Right, literally. Mm-hmm. Because the body is being literally played by the music and the vibration, and literally the whole body is played.
Yes.
And it can cause any number of physical and emotional effects.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now, one item here in the use of music is to get the conscious mind to lock on to the beat. And the purpose of this is, again, to clear the mind of all thoughts. So
distraction.
that the message gets through without interruption.
Yeah.
So when we think about what we are hearing, we can evaluate it, tear it apart, see if it makes sense. If we are not thinking, even if we have no feelings about the message, or even if we disagree with the message, if we're not thinking about it, if our mind is blank, repetition of that message is going to have an effect on us, and it can cause even any number of emotional and physical problems.
So the basic cadence or rhythm beat of a particular piece of music can indeed lull one into a sense of a state of distraction, stop conscious thinking, open the door for whatever lyric content may or may not be there.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right. And that's its purpose, is to do that.
What about a lot of the rock songs which feature lyrics that are very difficult to distinguish, if they're distinguishable at all?
That's a problem. If you can't hear the message clearly, you can't make the conscious choice to accept or reject it.
And then what happens to the message? It gets in anyhow?
That choice is taken away, and that message gets through and planted in the subconscious, and it is the repetition of that message over a period of time is going to have an effect. It is programming that's getting through, and can cause behavior on the part of a person whereby they don't know why they are behaving in a particular way, may have no clue to why, and it may be as a result of messages having been implanted.
Now, there are a lot of people who would point out that many of the lyrics in popular music certainly are very uplifting and very positive, and I think that's certainly true.
Sure.
But again, as you point out, getting to those lyrics can be a problem.
That is correct. Mm-hmm. And if you can't hear what's being said, then you have no participation in whether or not you're going to accept the message.
And many people apparently resonating to the lower frequencies in the lower parts of their bodies and having a hormone response to it, and probably could care less about the lyrics anyhow.
That is correct.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's meant as a distraction. It is part and parcel to the use of psychological warfare on a target population. These techniques are being used on a nationwide basis as part of an ongoing campaign against the citizens of this country.
I had a friend mention the other day, we were talking about this subject, and he said, gee, I've had this song in my head all day, I can't get rid of it, and I don't even like the song. That was pretty interesting. Apparently there was an imprint there that he couldn't shake.
Sure. And it is why we often cannot think for ourselves, because we are being influenced by things subconsciously and not aware of it.
Hypnotized into a state of physically feeling good and certainly escapist fare at the very least. The decrease in rights in this country, the increase in crime, television has been cited as the primary tool in that. How does the mass media play on the venue of changing our laws and possibly reducing our liberties in this country? That's a very interesting area to explore.
Mm-hmm. It is a classic use of Hegelian dialectics, which is a process to bring about change in a three-step process. What it involves is first create a problem, and then you create opposition to the problem, and then present the solution to the problem. Using the relationship between crime and violence and the decrease in our individual rights as an example, in creating the problem is by increasing crime, brought about in part by mass media programming of criminal behavior, where violence becomes acceptable means of problem solving, especially among young people. The relationship between crime and violence is there. Numerous motion pictures have shown that there is a relationship that exists. There were a number of motion pictures, the gang-related movies of the late of the 70s come to mind. I'm looking for an example here. One, The Warriors, was among early gang movies that was followed by violence in cities across the nation. Approximately 28 people died playing Russian roulette in response to seeing The Deer Hunter. Mm-hmm. And John Hinckley reported to his attorneys that the idea to assassinate President Reagan came to him after seeing the movie Taxi Driver. So there is a direct relationship between the depiction of graphic violence in media and what is happening out here in the street. It is a twin pincer movement, part and parcel of psychological warfare is economic warfare. They go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. So while people are being assaulted with these images in the media, and it spills off more and more into the street, older people are demanding that something be done about it. And what that usually entails and can entail is the diminishing of some of our rights and freedoms in order to have security. A condition is being created where people will accept the idea of giving up some of their freedoms in order to have a safe society, not realizing that it is part of a campaign to bring about just that, and that is more and more restrictions on individual rights.
That brings to mind the often quoted example of psychological warfare tactics used and being used by the power base to take away guns from Americans. They're pointing and playing up these mass murders, creating a tremendous opposition to that sort of behavior, and then offering a solution, which is the removal of various types of weapons, handguns, from the public.
Right, and that's an excellent example, a prime example. The sole function for the Second Amendment that secures the right to bear arms without any kind of qualification, the reason for it was to protect the citizen from government going bad. So long as citizens in numbers have weapons, if the government goes bad, then there is, as last resort, the tools with which to turn things around. That is the reason why the psychological warfare through the media to create circumstances of where people are behaving irrationally and causing more and more deprivation and hopelessness and crime, so that we get to a state of frenzy, anxiety, stress. Stress is a tool. It is a strategy in psychological warfare. The more stress people are placed under, the less clear their thinking processes will be. You will notice that the more comfortable you are, the more relaxed you are, the more perceptive you are in your thinking.
Yes.
When we're uptight, it affects our thinking. So stress and anxiety are part and parcel to this whole effort.
About a minute to the break here. We have many reports in the underground media, if you want to call it that, the non-mainstream media, of some of the mass murders of recent years having been instigated by various agencies within the power structure that is seeking to control more and more of our freedoms, in order that the media have something to put out there, which again will encourage the idea that guns are bad.
It perpetuates itself, sure.
Okay, all right, let's take our next break, and we'll be back with more with Stephen Jacobson. We'll talk about the famous movie Reefer Madness and what that film was really all about as we continue here at the end of the line. News Talk 1250 KTMS. We are back. I'm Jeff Rense. This is the end of the line. My guest, Stephen Jacobson, live from North Carolina, Winston-Salem to be exact. Stephen, the cult film Reefer Madness has been seen by many people. It's always sort of, I guess, fun to put on and laugh at, but that was a very powerful film with a very specific goal when it was made, was it not?
And also a very sophisticated film in its use of hypnotic techniques. In fact, it was as a result of seeing that film, at the same time I was involved in studying the initial research that I was given, was again during this period. I saw Reefer Madness at that time and noticed some things in it. And at a later date, made arrangements to get a print of the film and put it up on a flatbed editing table and examine it further, and had my suspicions confirmed that it was indeed a very sophisticated film. The stated intent of Reefer Madness, for the information of your listeners, was made in 1936. Its stated intent was to stamp out the menace of marijuana because it leads to, quote, acts of shocking violence ending often in incurable insanity. That was its message. However, that was its stated message.
Yes.
In contrast to that, however, young people are shown having a good time smoking marijuana, dancing, kissing, retreating to the bedroom. By showing young people having a good time smoking marijuana, Reefer Madness encouraged young people to at least try it. By telling the story of normal kids going berserk because of marijuana, Reefer Madness scared older people into demanding that something be done.
Mm-hmm.
Again, using the Hegelian dialectic of bringing about change. The movie was part of a well-orchestrated propaganda campaign that included newspapers, magazines, and radio. The effort was coordinated. In fact, some of the stories that appeared in the movie are practically verbatim from reports that appeared in the press that were provided by the then Federal Bureau of Narcotics. What this all led to was a year later, in 1937, after the release of the movie, the Marijuana Tax Act was signed into law, and what that did was drive prices up for the drug to make its cultivation and distribution profitable. So it's a very sophisticated piece of work for its time. The use of flash frames periodically through the movie in order to anchor certain information in the mind of the viewer, the use of even a hypnotic pendulum in the form of a noose going back and forth, again, the distraction for the eye. To the point of, in programming, is to get a person to focus one of the senses on something. Focus the eye on flashing words in a TV commercial, and local news ID tags here. I am seeing a lot of circles, moving circles, swirling, going, leading the viewer deeper and deeper into the viewing screen area. These are deepening techniques to deepen that state of mind. It's a natural state of mind. We go in and out of it every day, but it is being induced by the nature of the medium as far as television is concerned, but techniques are being used in all media to not only induce that state of mind, but to deepen that state of mind.
We have about 30 seconds in this first hour, Stephen. Words to live by for people watching TV. Do you have any?
Be aware of what you're doing. It would be better not to watch it. It is a distraction. We are not given accurate information. The tape, Mind Control in America, is full production with music, sound effects, examples for people to hear from different media.
And the phone number to get the tape, Stephen?
Phone number is area code 910-723-6535.
And that is an audio cassette. And the price for that?
The price for Mind Control in America is $11.95 post-pay.
Oh, that's a good deal. It's a wonderful tape, ladies and gentlemen. I've got it. I've listened to it several times. You can write also to MCIA Media, P.O. Box 15734, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And the zip code 27113. We'll repeat that in hour number 2. So, Stephen, thank you. Hang on. We'll be back to talk about the Federal Reserve, perhaps the greatest swindle in history, as we continue here at the end of the line. News Talk, 1250 KTMS.